Yeah, those cats, they can kind of just weasel right in. Okay, to officially start this, my name's Susan West. It's July 19th, 2017. I'm in Buxton, North Carolina, talking to Chalaron May. To start off with, can you tell me where and when you were born?
Yes, I was born in Norfolk, Virginia, on February 9th, 1944.
Okay. And
I lived in a place section called Willoughby, in Willoughby Spit, in Norfolk. In fact, the 14th Street where I lived, Jim Lyons was born across the street. His mother was a friend of my mother's. He's much younger than I am, but I remember when he was born.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
And so was that right on the water?
Yes, it was called Little Bay. Directly across from my house, across the water, was the Naval Air Station. They had seaplanes that landed right there in front of the house. They made big warm-up noise every morning before they took off.
And what did your parents do?
My father had a grocery store, small grocery store, and
right there in that community.
It was further, like South Norfolk.
Okay. And did your mom work?
Not at that time. She didn't, but she had worked as a secretary.
And let me ask you about your first name. I've never heard that before.
Oh, okay.
Where did that come from?
My mother resurrected, it's a family name.
Is it?
Yes. A French family name, and I'm named for a New Orleans cousin that came to visit like around 1900. Her last name was Charlaron. First name was, my mother said Therese, but I've just found out through Ancestry.com that it was really Therese, the French name, and they misspelled my name, so I guess I'm stuck with that part of it. But the family, part of the Virginia family, married part of the family that lived in New Orleans, and there's still Chalarons there. I've been in contact,
Okay.
Not a lot, but there's some.
Okay. I had never heard that name before, but I don't think I was ever thinking of it as a last name. I was thinking of it as a first name. It's beautiful. I love it. I think it's, I especially appreciate it because being a Susan was such a common name.
I always wanted to be named Susan.
Well, I wanted to be named Charlaron or something more exotic and different.
I always knew the first day of school, when they're calling the roll, and all of a sudden down the list, and there's a dead silence. They stop at my name. I thought, oh, gee. But I've gotten used to it.
How did you end up living on Hatteras Island? How did you get here?
My father, we always lived on the water there, and he had bought a boat. I don't know how many feet, maybe 20-something, like a little cabin cruiser.
Okay.
And he had the idea of putting 2 Evinrude motors on the back, which made it go a lot faster. And he had been born in Portsmouth, so he knew about Hatteras and wanted to visit. So my father bought my mother a Jeep. It was sort of like Mr. Connor's Jeep.
Okay.
And so they wanted to try it out. So we came, I think it's 1951. I've got some pictures I'll show you. And so we came across the ferry, which was a pitiful little ferry. I remember it literally, when we landed right on the sand, and the big, like the board to help us get off, it just flopped down into the sand, and you took off. And there were other people on the ferry in regular cars, but ours was 4-wheel drive, thank goodness, because there was no road from that ferry landing to Rodanthe. They had finished the road, I think, by 1951, all the way to Rodanthe, but you had to ride the surf basically from the ferry landing all the way to Rodanthe. And I remember this regular car getting stuck. I don't know. I guess they call the Coast Guard and got
but
them
you
out.
all were prepared with a Jeep.
Yeah. And we stayed at...
Did your mother drive that, or did you?
Yeah,
she did.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Durant's Motel, which was...
down in Hatteras.
Yeah, that's where we stayed. Oh, no, the first time that we stayed at... Scotty's, the inn. That's the first time we stayed there. What do you call it in Hatteras now? They've made it into an inn like it used to be, right beside Rocco's.
Yeah.
What do they call that now?
Seaside Inn, I think it is.
That was like a big boarding house.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, and I remember there was a screen porch on the back, and evidently there were people there, because I remember people. I was only like 6 years old, and we ate out on a screen porch, I think.
Did they provide meals?
Evidently, because that's where we ate. There really wasn't much here.
Right.
This is like, at Hatteras at that time really hadn't had tourists. They had sportsmen that came down because of the fishing and the ducks and that kind of thing. But it was coming to a place that hadn't seen real people in a long time. And so we kept coming back, and my father eventually brought our boat down, and he got to know all the guys at the dock. And because there weren't loads of tourists, we were sort of accepted, seemingly pretty fast. So that made it
really...
This would have
been in the early 50s?
Yeah, like 51, 52.
Okay.
And so my father became really good friends with some of the fellas. And when they'd come to Norfolk, they'd come to see us and that kind of thing. And then in 1957, my father said, "We're going to move to Hatteras." My poor mother. So we had a little trailer, like a Airstream.
Okay.
And pulled that down, and where the Seagull Motel was, there was just open field there. And Shank Austin's Durant's was down further. Okay. And so we stayed there. And we got water. I guess there was water, because we had a shower and everything. But we didn't have drinking water. We came to Buxton, right across from school. There was Mr. Casey, and he happened to be related to people we lived next door to in Willoughby too. So that's where we came up here to get the water, because that's that stream of water. In fact, I wonder if this was a well here, and I wonder if
that
you could
was well water.
Everybody had
Buxton.
everybody had well waters and water in Buxton in this area.
Okay.
But it was easier to get artesian water here. In Hatteras, everybody had to have a cistern.
Okay. That makes sense. So this is like an Airstream, that
small.
people use for...
Yeah, like
did
one
you
bedroom.
live in that year-round?
We lived in it just that summer.
Okay.
And then there was an old house in Hatteras Village up the road, and so my mother and daddy rented that and made it into a workable house, because it was not in great shape. And then we eventually moved across the street from, do you know where Dwight Burris's mother Dolores lived up the road?
Yes.
We lived in, it would be Dwight's uncle's house, Miss Myrtle.
Okay.
And that's where we lived. And
did your mother like living on Hatteras Island?
Oh, she loved it.
She did, as much as your father did.
Yes.
Yeah. And how about you when you were...
Oh, I loved it.
You did?
Yeah.
You didn't miss Norfolk?
No.
Really?
No. It was like we were all one big family, and somehow, here's some pictures of it in there. I made this for my mother and daddy about 2000. This is one of the trips before we moved here. See the Jeep?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And there's my mom and dad, and Cheetah, our little dog. I was 7 years old. It's 51. And this is, I guess there's still parts of it. Old landing craft that they had drug behind the boats in the storm, and they got loose. There were several big wrecks, like, see? From World War II.
Oh my goodness. These are fascinating.
And then there's even breaking apart there. And
was there anything on the beach where you were living when you lived in it?
No beach houses at all. Only house I remember being on the beach. Well, the motels were in Buxton, but Avon, there was one house, and I think Charles Williams' granddaddy might have built it out there. But it was not on the beach part, it was next to the road. And the store, his daddy had a store, a general store where Burger is, right in there. There was a general store there.
Okay. But really there wasn't...
Nobody lived in Nag's Head. Nag's Head was pretty... you can tell those cinder block houses, one-story houses,
Right.
they were of that era, but... And then they're old, really old houses.
Yeah.
But they hadn't started all this massive building.
I can't imagine what Hatteras was like at
Oh,
that time
yeah.
without development on
Yeah.
the beach and all.
Yeah, and this is the trailer. See, my father put a bathroom on it.
Oh, yeah.
And then my mother was going to Chattanooga to visit her parents. And this is Linda Casey. She lived next door to me in Norfolk. And it was her great uncle that lived up here. Her father, his name was Murray Casey, and he related to his parents grew up here. But they had moved to Norfolk. And this is the house they sort of restored there up the road in Hatteras. Where Randy Jordan, the property where they lived up the road.
Okay.
And,
wow, that is a...
See, it was in bad shape.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, but my parents were real decorators. And this is Myrtle Burris's and Herman's house across from Dwight. And see, that was where the cistern was. See it in the front?
Yeah.
And this is Cecilia Scarborough. Okay, her two brothers are here. Gene was her husband. He would have been in the Navy.
Bobby and Leon.
Yes, her brothers. They were a bit older. They had already joined the service by the time I got there. And this is my mother. We had all these ducks and chickens.
So what did you do for fun here when you were a little girl?
Okay, and the big deal was at night we'd get together and walk down the road, we called it, and where... Okay, who is it? Gail Van Note and Eddie Slagle.
Okay.
That was his grandfather's store there in the village. And so we hung around the store there, and then Bill Burris's store, where Burris is, red and white, and we just hung around there.
And Eddie Scagle's relative had that store. Was he the one that was called Mr. Anders?
Mr. Ander.
Okay.
He sure did was.
Okay.
And his mother and father, they lived here for a while, his mother and daddy, and stayed there for a short time. And then this is my patient dog. This is red-winged blackbird that my daddy could whistle and the bird would show up.
Oh, my goodness.
And this is my parents. This is Miss Lizzie Austin. they gave a review, like a play, and they sold tickets and all that. That's Miss
Really?
Lizzie Austin. It was called the Gay 90s, and Dolores, they sang and they danced, and
Oh my goodness!
yeah, everybody.
I had
in the,
no idea that
the most famous play ever given on Hatteras Island.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Yeah. So it was a big hit. So this is.
Oh.
I can remember them. They didn't have limits back then.
Uh-huh.
They just never seen so many.
So your mother was a real outdoors woman.
She was quite a lady. She really was. Now this is Odin's General Store. Back in the back of here, that's where the docks are back there in the breakwater. And they started crabbing. That's my mother and daddy going out in the boat.
How about that? Commercially, so they sold their catch.
Yeah, they did. And this is another, he was a millionaire, came down here, Mr. Murdoch. Lori Burris Parker. Do you know who I'm talking about? Dr. Burris's daughter?
I don't know her.
She lived in the house that Mr. Murdoch had.
Okay.
And I think this last hurricane did it in. I think she's getting a new one. But this is Mr. Murdoch. He was quite an entrepreneur. He sort of came at a time, just loved it here. And he had a big car dealership there, but he was a sportsman, liked to fish and everything. Got to know all the guys.
Where he was from?
Someplace like Pittsburgh, I think.
Hatteras had a lot of people like that come to visit.
Yeah.
Wealthy sportsmen.
Yeah, that's
from
right.
Metropolitan areas.
Right.
So,
this is. Do you know Buddy Burris?
I do.
That's Buddy in the boat
my
going
goodness.
out. And this is Dudley. That's his father. That's mother. That's coming into the Odin's dock right there.
How about that? There she is, bringing the boat in.
And the ducks and the geese. And this is Reba Burris, Dwight's sister that passed away. She was my best friend.
Okay.
She lived across the street. And Daddy it doesn't have anything in it, but it was just one of those big liquor bottles. Yeah. There's my mother. I don't know. She was dressed up going someplace.
Oh, what great photos you have. These are lovely. So, you went to school here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
till the 11th grade, through the 11th grade.
And then what?
And then that time, my father, they weren't making a lot of money, being a commercial fisherman. So they decided we needed to move back to Portsmouth. That's where he was from. And worst day of my life.
You didn't want to leave?
No, I didn't want to leave. And so we moved back. But,
and so you did 12th grade up there.
Yeah. So...
And was that hard going back?
Yes, because it was a school with 3,000 kids in it.
And how many kids do you think
we had about 12, 14 kids in our class here.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah.
So you graduated from school up there.
And then I went
How did you get back to Hatteras Island?
Okay, I graduated, and then I decided I was going to go to East Carolina. Well, Susie Austin, you know Susie?
Yes.
And Donnie Oden. Donnie had been in my class, so we all went to East Carolina. My father drove me to Whalebone Junction to meet up with Donald, who was taking Susie. He had a station wagon. Susie and Donnie to East Carolina and me. So we all three arrived at East Carolina at the same time. And in the meantime, my parents were working there in Norfolk, and I think it was more like the end of my sophomore year, they decided they were going to move back to Hatteras.
Oh, okay.
So they did. And so I was still at East Carolina, and eventually met Billy while I was there.
And where was he from?
A farm community outside of Greenville, Snow Hill area. Really from a place called Scuffleton. So we got married.
Scuffleton?
Scuffleton, yeah.
I never heard of it.
I didn't know you wouldn't.
And you studied education out
I did.
there?
I became a teacher, and I taught for 6 years in Snow Hill, and my parents were here.
Okay. And what did you teach in Snow Hill?
5th grade.
Okay.
And then Billy worked for a tobacco company, a British company. And it was at that time they were having trouble in Rhodesia. They pulled the tobacco company called Imperial Tobacco.
Okay.
They made player cigarettes. I don't know, they're very famous old cigarettes or whatever. So they pulled out of the United States. So he was without a job, but although he had been working as a carpenter when they had their off season. So he said, "You want to go to Hatteras?" I said, "I sure would." So that's why we became, and Jimmy Webb, a lot of connections there. Jimmy and Ann, he was already the principal here.
Okay.
And his brother and sister-in-law, the sister-in-law was my suite mate all the way through college, Susan.
Oh.
So they knew we wanted to move back, and Don got hold of Jimmy. I called Jimmy, and I came for an interview, and they hired me. So.
And what year was that?
That was 72.
Okay. And did you teach 5th grade here?
I did. I taught 5th grade here.
Okay.
Until the last 10 years that I taught. Then I taught 4th grade.
And in 1972, in the 70s, I imagine the school here was a little different than what it is now.
Oh, yes. It was like, by that time, they had built the addition on the side. When I went to high school there were only 4 rooms dedicated to the high school.
Oh, my goodness.
You could cut it off, basically. Well, I'll show you a picture of it in just a minute. Let's see if I can find that annual.
Oh,
So it was
goodness.
really small when I was there. And then by the time I came back, they had added a side, or if I can get in here, I'm going to sell antiques at the bazaar. I sell antiques like I need to be doing something else.
That's good. Keeps you busy,
Yeah,
right?
it is. So that's the school.
Okay.
That's all there was.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
And they didn't have kindergarten.
Right.
So that would have been, the lunchroom was behind it, and then this was the gym, the catch-all
Okay.
for everything, the little gym
And
that
so
you remember probably.
yeah,
that.
there were
And the
4
rooms were on the front, and then they just added, by the time I got back here, they had added that section over here for the high school.
Okay.
But that's what I got the job.
And was it different than your teaching experience in Snow Hill?
Yes, because I, in Greene County, had been part of a class action suit. This is before integration. It's one of the first places probably in the South. We were on a court order to integrate. So this was going to be a really interesting thing because that had not happened before. So
Right.
they moved, so I was involved with that, where we left the all-white schools and they had a new school for African-American children of that age. And this involved the high school, involved everybody. But we, moved one fall. I've forgotten what year. It must have been like 69, 68, somewhere in there. And so to be the first to do that, it turned out very well.
Did it?
It did. The
wasn't-
children got along fine.
They did.
The parents were the ones that were crying in the hall and worried, but as it turned out, it went
pretty
It
smooth
did.
then.
It did. There were no demonstrations, and
That must have been fascinating, though, to
it was, and
live through that and be
my
a part
uncle,
of that.
My father's brother was a reporter for the Associated Press, and when he found out that we had integrated that year, he asked to come down, and he wrote a big story, went all over the United States with our pictures and everything in it about what happened, and interviewed. I have to find the...
That is exciting.
Yeah, it was. It was. So that was something different. Of course, here there wasn't anybody to integrate for a long time. I've forgotten her last name. The first African American child was Ursula. I'll have to ask Caroline the last name.
And do you know
what year? That was after we moved back with Billy, so it was after 72. Probably more towards the 80s, I guess.
And do you know how come her family lived here?
She lived up in Rodanthe or Waves. I'll have to ask some of them.
Interesting.
P.J. Williams might know. He could have been close to her age. I'll try to find out.
And do you think it was hard for her?
No. You know, she seemed to get along well. Now, I do remember before we totally integrated, we had... in Snow Hill, we had something called freedom of choice, which meant, you know, they were trying to get out of integrating. So, in other words, if you wanted to go to the white school, you could, but you didn't have to. Well, not too many people, they were worried, scared.
Sure.
And I had, the first year they did that, I had 3 children in the 5th grade there in Snow Hill, and one was... a little girl, and then there were 2 boys, James Nobles and LaFawn Forbes.
Oh, you remember their names?
Yeah. The little girl, I can't remember, Devorah Williams. The boys did fine. They played sports, you know, and that helped so much. But I can see Devorah standing under a tree just by herself. She just... nobody did anything ugly. It just she, you know, being one little girl, that was a rough, tough thing to handle. But when we integrated once, you know, and it was pretty equal, basically like maybe 60, 40%, 40% white, 60% African American, and still that way. But we were, you felt proud of pulling it off. I hate to see what's happening now, though, is people have more money than they had back then, and tending to send, if you can afford it, send your children to private schools, and that's making things a bit different, although we have quite a large Hispanic population there now. So,
but yeah, it does make it a lot different. There isn't that attention to the public schools from
that worries me
folks
very
that
much.
Could be advocates for more funding and resources.
That's right, and that's the way to keep your population, everybody knowing each other. Otherwise, you're going to get isolated groups again.
You're right. Yeah. The school can really sort of serves as.
Of course, I don't have any children, and then you wonder, well, what would I do? But I just think public education is a wonderful thing. Opportunity that's what makes this country great.
Yes, I agree. So, your husband Billy, he wanted to come to Hatteras to live?
Yes.
And your parents had been back here for 7 or 8 years?
Yeah.
And were they commercial fishermen then?
No, by that time they had retired.
Okay. So.
But then my father started the restaurant.
That's what I want to ask.
Okay, the building was an old fish house, really was.
And operating a fish house.
It had been operated, but Snowden Quiddley, I think, had a fish house there. But Donald Oden owned it.
Okay.
And Donald and my father were best friends. And it was a bit in disrepair. They weren't going to use it as a fish house. And Daddy talked to Donald and made some kind of arrangement where we could rent the restaurant. And so this is the year before we moved down. They started working, opening it up. My father was always a good cook, liked to cook.
But he never worked in a restaurant, had he?
He had some restaurant experience.
Oh, he did? Okay, good.
But he put my mother out front. It was like you went up to a counter and you ordered, and my father cooked. He had like fried daddies in the back. Okay. That's how much smaller it was there. And so my mother would take the orders at the counter, and then my father would fix it on a paper plate, and they'd come back up. She used first names, which I thought was really neat always.
Oh, that is.
And so they'd call, and of course back then it wasn't that busy until we had holidays, and then it got busier. Now my father, he was only going to handle so much. So in other words, if it got too busy, he'd close.
Okay. So
that kind of thing. And then
it was called the Clam Box.
Yes, yeah.
And, I mean, at that time, we didn't have, like, Cisco food deliveries and all.
You still, you were getting, like, Jeanette's.
Okay,
they came
from
down.
Elizabeth City.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they sold a lot of fried clams.
Uh-huh.
And they really... they used commercial slaw, and my father was a good cook, but it was for just two people who were, oh golly, how old did they have to be then? 60s, some years old, that they could just do so much. So they used some commercial food. So, and finally, I think they were there like 9 years. Billy had a heart attack in 81. We were building a house, so he couldn't build the cabinets and stuff and all that stuff at that time. So
here on the island.
Yes, sure did. He was only 42.
Oh my goodness.
So my father, when Billy, after he had the bypass operation, my father said he was tired of the restaurant and would we be interested, and we said yes. So that was 81, and we retired basically in 99.
Okay. But you operated the restaurant a long time. In addition to teaching. You're teaching at the same time.
Yeah.
But I can remember seeing Billy at fish houses buying fish.
He did.
And all.
They called him Sticky Fingers.
Sticky Fingers?
Because he was a particular person. And that's what helped us get local business, I think, because fishermen knew Billy wasn't going to serve it if it wasn't right. That was his reputation. He was that way with anything. He'd do without or what. It didn't make any difference. If it wasn't what he thought it should be, that's the way it was going to be.
Okay.
And so they knew that they were going to get good food there. And he cleaned. For many years, he cleaned every fish that we sold. Then eventually we got so busy we couldn't do it.
Okay.
And his view was if he didn't know where the seafood was coming from, except for fried clams, now we just use those, that he didn't want to serve it. So that meant he went every week. He went to Mattamuskeet, Swan Quarter, and between he and Steve Bailey, they'd get crab meat over there and soft shells. And then we had another friend that was a friend of my father's that was from Gloucester, across the Sound, Julian Brown. He just passed away. Yes. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah. He was quite a character, and his sons are characters.
Yes.
And but he'd bring the seafood. So we get 2 full deliveries.
Okay. So he trucks seafood up this way.
Yeah, and clams.
Okay.
Yeah. Shrimp.
Did you like the restaurant business?
We did, and you wonder, how did I do both? Well, I didn't have any children, so that made a difference. And we had the best help in the world.
Oh.
They were priceless. And I never, ever had, in at least the first 15 years, if they made basically their own schedules. They told me what to do, and I did it. So,
Okay.
but
That's great.
they cared about what they were doing, and watched out for each other. If somebody had to be off, they'd arrange it. I never walked in a shift and found that there was missing people that hadn't been covered.
That's fantastic.
It
They took
is.
care of that.
They did. They were wonderful.
That is great.
So we're all still really, really close. It was only to the last year when we'd gotten so much busier and Billy was sick. And
What was wrong with Billy?
he had developed congestive heart failure. Now, he'd already had the operation years ago. So that meant he had to have another surgery, which doctors, he was so young when he had the first one. And so it was wearing out. And,
Okay.
and so he had to have another operation. And after that, and then my mother had passed away.
Oh.
And he just decided that he never complained about being so far from a hospital and all that kind of stuff. But after the second bypass, he was ready to get off the island.
And be closer to medical care.
Yeah. And he had developed diabetes by that time.
And had you retired from teaching?
I retired in 95. My mother developed lung cancer.
Oh, dear.
So, and she passed away in 99. So, I would have loved to have stayed long. I did 30 years, but I would have stayed longer because I loved teaching. And, but
So you moved away?
we moved away in 2000, moved to New Bern. Billy wanted to be near the water, but, and that was okay, but I missed the small town here and the people here. And so we eventually ended up moving back to Snow Hill, where I encountered a lot of people that I had taught in the 5th grade. My organist at churches, I taught him, and it was like deja vu again, like here.
Right.
And no, in fact, Linda Monsell and I went to Hatteras. I had to see Kathy Parsons, the accountant, and they're lifting up Bert's house down there. And I said, Linda, I want to see that house. I want to see inside of the old house. I love old houses. And the guys had built the, stairs going up. So I went over to one of them. He was turning around backwards. And I said, would it be all right if we went in the house? We don't want to bother you. And he turned around and he looked at me and said, who are you? I said, I'm Chalaron May. I said, who are you? He said, Bobby Morgan. And, of course, we knew each other. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. And I looked up on the porch there. I said, it can't be. It was Robert Morgan, his son, that I taught so many years ago.
Oh, that is funny.
Yeah, and I love seeing my former students. I still think of them as kids. But we went up to the house, and Robert's talking to us. He said, I miss school. He was not fond of it then, but I said, I do too, Robert. So.
Yeah, sometimes you don't realize you had it good when you're in school.
Yeah. He said, I've been helping my dad 20-some years. I said, oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's like old home week one night.
Right. So your husband, when did your dad die?
My daddy died in 2002, I think it was.
Oh, after your mom.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he stayed here, and then he ended up having colon cancer, so he came back over to stay with us in New Bern, and things got worse. And he had to go to a nursing home it was really only a month, and he called me over one day. He was not happy there at all, naturally, and he called me over. He said, "Have we got any money left?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Get me out of here." I said, "We're getting out of here." And I called up Ann Webb, who loved my mother and Daddy. She just was great friends with them. And Daddy was really sick then, and so they put him in the back of my car, and, well, not the Suburban, and Ann called up the EMTs in Burt Austin, and I had to stop at the hospital on the way down because they hadn't given up in Nag's Head oxygen, had to wait to get that. And so we arrived like 12 o'clock, and there were a bunch of people.
Oh.
Bert and the EMTs makes me sad thinking about it.
I'm sure. It's touching. It really is. It's a good community here. Good community. And that says a lot about how they welcomed your dad and your mom as one of them.
They did.
A lot of small places I don't think are as welcoming as Hatteras Island is. So then when your husband Billy died, then you made a decision at some point that you wanted to have a place here on Hatteras again.
Yeah, I did.
And tell me a little bit again. You found this property and this house.
I started looking
This
around.
what you called the German house. Tell me a little bit more about the history or what you've heard about your house.
That Carol Dillon said, she is Taffy, was Nell Wise Wechter's book, and evidently her mother was a postmistress here in Buxton, and supposedly in the book, I don't know if it really happened that way, but supposedly there was a German family that lived here. And I don't know if they really disappeared like they did in the book, but they were strangers to the island for some reason. They weren't related to anybody.
Right.
This is World War II. And I don't know how long they had been here.
Right.
But that's just from mixing Nell Wise Wechter's story into it. I don't know how much is exactly true or not. But Carol can tell you.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Have you interviewed her?
No, we haven't.
Oh, gosh, you should.
Yeah, we definitely should. But I've always heard the stories through the years I've lived here about, there were German spies.
Yeah, well, this is where they lived. This is what supposedly what it was. But heck, they could have had a Pennsylvania Dutch accent, and they thought.
Right.
But they, I don't know what happened. They weren't arrested that I know of. So, but that's the way she wove the story. And Nell Wise Wechter, when I interviewed for my job here to come back to teach, she was reapplying. She had to be 70 years old then.
My goodness.
And she, Carol Lang and myself and Nell Wise Wechter were being interviewed for the job.
Okay.
So,
was the interview hard? I mean, did you...
look, can I tell you something you can't print?
Yes.
All right. Fred Newman, you remember Fred Newman?
Mm-hmm.
Fred Newman and Ann Jeanette
Okay.
and Dolores Gillikin, I think, was on they had local boards too, not the big main.
Okay.
Each school had a local one. And Jimmy has been principal here for 1 year. And so they called out, you're waiting to go be interviewed, and you're wondering what in the world they're going to ask. Well, the first thing they asked me was, do you have a place to live?
Uh-huh.
How important that was.
Yes.
And the
That's
second
still important.
question was, do do you wear a bra?
Oh.
That's when the year before they had hired this couple, and evidently she was very attractive. She taught in high school. The husband taught 4th grade, and there are all sorts of stories about her and how she dressed and what she didn't wear.
Okay.
And I about fell out of the seat when.
That was the time period
where a
lot of women were going braless.
That's right, the hippie era and everything.
Yeah.
So, oh my God, what kind of question is that?
I love it.
I know, isn't that funny?
Oh,
so we laugh a lot about that kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't think they asked me much about teaching. So,
but.
They did ask more than that, but those were the first 2 questions.
Were there any, when you were teaching here, were there any unique challenges that you remember for students here that kids in other places probably didn't face?
Well, the good thing was it was so wonderful because they were talking about TV programs that they watched. Mm-hmm. And they tell me about watching Nova and all these wonderful educational programs. That's because they had no channel,
Right.
It was great, And the challenge is we basically had all the supplies that we needed. And the wonderful thing about it was that you're in a close community and you knew everybody, and you knew who to go see, and they knew you knew who to go to see,
right.
And parents and whatever, and made keeping children on track much easier that way.
I'm sure.
Hopefully they felt that same way about us. We had a pretty dedicated group of teachers. After we'd been there a couple of years, they hired Carol. Then Mike and Nancy came, and Jim Lyons, who had lived across the street from me when he was a baby.
Right.
And my theory was that it was so important to hire local people who were going to stay.
Oh,
that always we worried about that because we did have some, all of a sudden they'd come one year and they couldn't handle it.
Sure.
The isolation is what it was, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's different. And back then, it was even more different. Are you happy that you got this place so that you can spend a lot of time here?
I know, and the other thing, and I've told Vivian and Charles Gray about that anybody that is away and doesn't have a home here anymore, they're welcome to use this anytime they want to.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Because, Vivian, they had basically sold everything here, but yet she still has family. So
that's a very nice offer, because there are a lot of folks like that who have moved away but still have roots here.
That's right.
And want to come back to visit. Well, I appreciate your time this morning.
Well, you're
welcome.
welcome.
Spur of the moment. Let me see if I can find the...
Let's see what happened. Oh, look at the big